This is the story you've heard about, talked about. The spine-tingling, blood-chilling story that stuns your emotions. Frankenstein.
Don't touch that!
British director James Whale replaced Robert Florey on the film after Lugosi had turned down the role. Whale discovered Boris Karloff in the Universal Commissary. Karloff had been doing mostly character roles as thugs or foreigners. Despite the heavy Jack Pierce makeup and no lines, Karloff managed to take what was little more than a stuntman role and turn it into one of the greatest acting performances of all time. Karloff turned Frankenstein's monster into a tragic, childlike figure, abandoned by his creator and misunderstood by society. Frankenstein made Karloff a star, and Karloff made Frankenstein unforgettable. Karloff would have a long career in Hollywood, but like Lugosi, he would mostly be typecast as a monster man.
This is a monster that we can absolutely identify with, and there's a tenderness that Karloff brings to his savagery as well. And I think the blend between those, it's as much a love for the character as it is for the performance.
I think that Karloff's performance as the monster in Frankenstein is probably the greatest single piece of film acting ever. It's almost a miracle to watch that to watch that performance and to see what he was able to accomplish through all the makeup, through all the suffering, through all the agony he had to go through playing the part. You have this monster dug up, sewn together, pieced together from corpses, from the graves, from the gallows, anywhere, as Colin Clive says. And yet he turns out to be the most dimensional, moving, soulful personality in the whole film. And that's the kind of little wicked miracle that Frankenstein accomplishes and that Karloff accomplished in it.
What Boris did well,
Civil rights leaders make a joint condemnation of the violence and call for an end to the rioting. President Johnson, using firm words, urges the nation's citizens to support the maintenance of law and order. While Newark struggles to restore peace and order, the racial bitterness spreads to 4 nearby suburban towns, where a policeman is beaten to death, guns are stolen, looting and violence are reported. New Jersey, a state under siege.
Starting in the early 60s in the cities, in the inner cities especially, with the assassinations of people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, the black population was becoming increasingly infuriated. They were already downtrodden through lack of civil rights, but that sort of was the ignition, the fuse that set it off when their leaders, the few leaders that they had, were being killed one by one. That led to a black empowerment movement. You had the Black Panthers and other groups like that that were becoming more and more radicalized, more and more taking to the streets. So the blacks were getting their own identity at the time, a different kind of identity, of an aggressive identity, if you will. That, I think, led to a new kind of filmmaking, where blacks were taking control of their filmmaking. But it all came out of, I believe, the violence of the 60s. Again, it changed us all.
There is something that happened in the film In the Heat of the Night. Sidney Poitier is in the greenhouse, and this rich white man smacks him, and he smacks him right back.
Was Mr. Colbert ever in this greenhouse, say last night about midnight?
Gillespie, yeah, you saw it. I saw it. Well, what are you going to do about it? I don't know.
Many people had never seen that before. And that moment said equality. I see these so-called blaxploitation pictures as an extension of that moment.
Three, two, 1, 0.
Newspapers of the day were filled with stories on the Cold War, threats of nuclear annihilation, and the Russian launch of Sputnik. Hollywood studios, large and small, turned these real-life terrors into a series of science fiction films, happily increasing the Cold War paranoia.
The fascinating thing about horror is, or horror cinema, is that it consistently adapts itself to reflect trends in our culture. You know, okay, you have the, everything was this sort of gothic horror until we dropped the bomb, and all of a sudden, nobody wanted to see a guy in a tuxedo and a cape anymore. And then as we had this genuine fear of communism, it was reflected, in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and not just that film. I mean, some of the lower budget Corman films, it's, oh my God, radiation, we're all going to die. Actually, we're not going to die, we're going to mutate. That's what we're going to do.